Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restituta Orbis channel. And as always, I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and I would like to extend a greeting to all viewers, prime explorers, and all others joining us for this live stream exploration. This weekend, we're taking a look at the reset plan. We've explored resets in many different nuances, but I thought now would be a good time to step back and take a look at how a reset plan might actually occur, or how it may have occurred, what it would look like. And the first image that we're looking at here is actually a transposed image from our interesting illustrations from the Battle of Ventry, where we have an Irish myth that indicates that there was a king of the world who was attacking Ireland and was rallying the forces of the world to do this. It also works really well to give an idea of what it may be with some sort of council or some sort of detached, how shall we say, non-world actors that are making policy. Now, when we talk about planning a reset, are we talking about a hard reset, or are we talking about an artificial reset? Are we talking about someone who may just simply have knowledge of cyclical events? Well, for this particular exploration, we're looking at the knowledge of the cyclical events. And we're going to assume that the individuals that planned it simply knew that there was going to be some sort of natural catastrophe of some sort, mud flood, plasma rain, some combination of other events that would completely change the physical face of the world, or the land, or whatever you want to call it. But whether it looked like this or not, how would they go about planning it? Well, there could be another consideration where these entities, these powers, this force that we call the ancient enemy, but we have many other terms for it, might actually be able to impose catastrophic events. Although if they had that capability, they'd probably be doing it a lot more often. So from this exploration, we're going to assume, make the speculation that they don't have that ability. So how then would they go about making their plan? KC933, AI plans it. Yeah, maybe. One has to wonder if that is indeed the case, or at least if there's some sort of disembodied AI force that's acting out there. Well, you know, Adam, it could just simply be the lexicon or the use of words to really get it in minds, because what we're also going to talk about in this exploration is how the population can be controlled. Now, we're not going to talk about specific organizations, because it really could be any sort of organization, but just really talking about it from an objective perspective. So going on from our little council of planning the reset here and how it might look like, what you have here on this very interesting PowerPoint slide here is acquisitions, lag time, and workarounds. This is what's called operational design. And this is what's used by, namely, the United States military in joint operations, utilizing a plan to go from one state to a different state. Now, I know this all looks like a lot of gobbledygook and it doesn't look that interesting, but what it does show you is that at all levels, there are means of planning to change the way something looks. And yes, it even happens in the military at a relatively low echelon level, what they call the operational level. And so what are our objectives? How are we going to change each of these lines of operation? Now, I'm not going to dwell on this one too much. I'm just showing you this to let you know that, yes, there are formats for doing this and how it may work and how it may look. And indeed, there are multiple agencies, not just the United States, who operate in these mentalities. They have different lines of operation. So a line of operation is a focus area. What are the principles of governance? The definition of governance is evolving as organizations are increasingly expected to define and embed their purpose at the center of their business. But the principles of agency, accountability, and stewardship continue to be vital for truly good governance. So what the heck is good governance? We don't know. We're not defining it. You don't say. But anyway, you'll see there's all kinds of plans like this that are out there at all levels. Whoops, skipped one. And it gives you the idea that perhaps somebody does have a means or a mechanism for tricking people to go into certain areas. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but deceiving people. And indeed, that's where we get this image of the underworld. And you might remember one of the early explorations on this channel. We called it the underworld horror, where we were looking at what may happen if you had all these individuals that were deceived into going into underground areas under the auspices that that's where they would be safe. Or if you want a more common example, look at our recent reset explorations where we talked about the fallout vaults. The vaults were not actually there to save the people's lives. They were actually there to test the people in various means, because there were other nefarious purposes going on. So is that what this lovely Middle Age or medieval art could be representing? Yes, but it could also be representing something much more. Now, of course, we have it associated with the confabulation that we have in our minds of hell. We can thank Dante for the 9,000 levels of hell. I know it's not 9,000, but I'm just having a little bit of fun with it. But it's interesting when you see how many ways that this evolved over time. Now, this is probably a little bit more of a easy way to look at that whole thing called operational approach. But if you think about it, this little planning council that we had, where whatever level they operate at, they probably have conditions that they want at their end state. They have a different way of existence that's going to happen after the reset. They have new definitions. Are there going to be certain nation states? Are there going to be certain means of operating? Is there even going to be an entirely new economy? Or is there going to be a means of economy in terms of how it competes with each other? Just think about this. You have the ability after a reset to completely draw up the world to look any way that you want it to look. You can have a one nation world, or you could have a many nation world. Yes, they actually have that ability. Think about that, to really define all these things. And if they could define all these things, then what else can they define? And who is they? Again, the ancient enemy, the forces that would actually be planning this after a reset. Now, the first thing I wanted to take a look at to go from the overall broad concept, as RB says, a blank canvas. But a blank canvas from our perspective, but remember that everything that we learn and everything that we know has been imposed on us over time. Now, we're going to take a look at some what are purported to be combat photos from the Franco-Prussian War. Now, the Franco-Prussian War tends to be overlooked quite a bit. I mean, it is significant from a historical milestone if you look at the official history, but as a conflict, it tends to get hand-waved a lot, especially in places like the United States and other places in the Western world. But it was a significant conflict because it was where Prussia defeated France and the maverick political leader Napoleon. Yes, another Napoleon. No, not the original Napoleon, but this would be Napoleon III. Does it really matter? Is it the same guy? I don't know. I'm not going to delve into that part of the history. But yes, oddly enough, this is only a few years after the United States Civil War, and yet we see some interesting similarities. I wonder what they were actually taking this picture from. Was this from some sort of observation balloon? We have some interesting fortifications, and we have everybody just posing. Where have we seen this before? Nah, it couldn't look like the United States Civil War. And then, of course, we have our many formation photos. Now, are we actually looking at the French army? Are we looking at the Prussian army? Doesn't really matter. And you may recall that as that war ended up, France had to surrender, and thus this led to the foundation of the new German state. The German state that was under the overall control of Otto von Bismarck, technically under the leadership of the Kaiser, Wilhelm, although whatever the actual political arrangements were, we can debate it till we're blue in the face. And keep in mind that despite the creation of this new German superstate, we still had many people that were emigrating to the United States from Germany, despite the fact that they had a brand new nation and even a wonderful new social welfare program. Why in the heck would anybody want to leave that? I don't know. Anyways, when you look at the photos of the Franco-Prussian War, you see the same things. I mean, these guys almost look like they're bored. Oh, look, we've got the hand in the coats. And oddly enough, what really strikes me about this is how similar the disposition and the uniforms appear to the images that we see from the United States Civil War. Yeah. Is it a parade? Is it just some great photo session? Are we just acting like there's a war? I don't know. It's very intriguing. And as RB says right here, don't even know if the given dates are correct for the photos. No, we really don't. Or if the historical account lines up with the photos that we have. But what we do have here, Griffin says it real well here, strike the pose. That's what it is too. Strike the pose. You're in a war, but you're by a cannon. I guess this is an area here between the fortifications that you're looking out of. And really trying to study the actual campaigns of the Franco-Prussian War are quite intriguing. Some of the interesting movements of the Prussian army and the French army in defense. And if you're into that kind of thing, now maybe you're not, and that's totally fine. But this is supposed to be the Battle of Sedan here, or the Siege of Sedan. And apparently this is supposed to be showing combat. Although, of course, when we look closely at this image, yes, we have the usual intricacies. I mean, is this a battle going on? Is this some sort of marching formation? Is there a surrender going on? I mean, it looks like we have some fallen, and of course, I have to be very careful in terms of showing the fallen. I mean, I guess from certain perspectives, we could say that this is an actual battle photograph, and so that is one more battle photograph than we have for the entire United States Civil War, which was concluded only 6 short years before this impeccable conflict. But it's intriguing that there's really not that many images at all. And of course, we've got the image here of the Prussian soldiers marching across the open field. And this was the first time that France would be occupied and forced to surrender. But we're not going to focus on the Franco-Prussian War because there's actually something even more interesting that happened right at the end of this conflict. And in fact, something that is even more well documented than the war itself, which is rather bizarre. Ah, yes, here we have another one of these interesting combat photos. So apparently we supposedly have people that are shooting at each other down here, people dying on the field. But then we got this one guy right here who seems to be standing loud and proud and not really caring if he gets shot in the back. Now, I'm not there, I don't know. But to actually go through these photos and try to analyze them, and I use the term photos very loosely, to try to analyze them, what's really going on here? Or once again, is this just trying to set our expectations? I mean, I suppose if we just looked at it with a cursory glance, then yes, perhaps we could accept that this is a battle photograph of an actual battle that's taking place during the Franco-Prussian War. But I see that a lot of you are all picking up on the ideas that I'm laying down, and that's why I don't even have to say it. Yeah, Jamie has another way of saying it here, hamming it up. Yeah, I mean, it's literally almost like it's a movie, you know? You've got Brad Pitt right there, you know, because we'll do Fury in the Franco-Prussian War, and here's Brad Pitt standing tall and proud. I mean, really, that could be anybody. But you know, he's got his knee out there and his hand on his hip, and he looks really cool, large, and in charge, as we'd expect. While soldiers are apparently dying out here. Yeah. Photoshopped, drawn, I don't know. I didn't take the photo. But again, just from the Franco-Prussian War. And then, of course, we have no shortage of our wondrous paintings, much like we have for the United States Civil War, that show the incredible processions here with the Arch of Triumph. Now, yes, I know that's not what they actually call it. This must have been before they completely redid the block and made it into that very impressive grid pattern that we see to this day. Again, I'm sure that's a coincidence as well. So you look at this Franco-Prussian War, you would expect this to be a little bit more well documented. You would expect there to be more photographs. You would expect there to be, hey Rob, good to see you. You would expect there to be a chronological documentation of the photos, given how significant this conflict was. But this is where things start to get really strange. And when we look at a reset plan, a time of fundamental change, what I'm arguing that we have here, going off from this Franco-Prussian War, is actual evidence of a reset in effect, or rather, putting a reset in effect. And so what is this event that I was talking about that immediately followed the Franco-Prussian War? Well, let me get this image up here, and we'll look at our next set of images. Now, you may have heard of this, you may not. Again, this is a historical event that tends not to be talked about outside of Paris very much. Hold on, let me get there on the widescreen. There we go. The Paris Commune. So in 1871, right at the tail end of the Franco-Prussian War, the men and women of Paris took over their city and created an autonomous government committed to equality for all. The Paris Commune shows that a new society created from the bottom up is possible, but that the ruling order never willingly cedes power. Well, all true statements there, I suppose. And then here's where it gets very, very interesting. The old world must come to an end! Exclamation. We want to be free! Exclamation. And France has not risen up alone. The civilized nations of the world have their eyes on Paris. They are waiting for our victory to free themselves in their turn. A group of Parisian women, April 11th, 1871. Now, it should be noted that this little uprising was conducted officially by this national army that was charged with defending Paris during the Franco-Prussian War. And once the war ended unfavorably for France, and then they started the next French Republic, you know, there's a story of a French Republic always being born after one of these events. Despite that, suddenly somebody just started a revolution. Now, of course, most of us in the Western world, especially those of us in the United States, we have a very unique conditioning to react a certain way when we see certain words. And indeed, whenever we see the word commune, yes, it caters to certain preconceived notions in our mind. But this commune is very interesting because it only lasted for 2 months. Now keep that in mind. This government that just set itself up at the tail end of a vicious struggle for survival against those nasty Prussians, you know, before they became Germans, you know, even though Prussians were Germans, but, you know, we don't need to really talk about that. And then all of a sudden they were constantly threatening France all the way through the first part of the 20th century. Of course, that's very much not the situation now, but that's the history. Now, you can find no shortage of maps that show you how Paris was broken down and how this Paris Commune, this ad hoc government, which managed to formulate itself, decided to defend the city. Now, we're not really going to focus so much on that. We're going to recall the good words of our fictional character, John Cabal, from the film Things to Come. And what does the, how shall we say, reset forces really think of sovereign nations? Well, he said it very directly. We do not respect sovereign nations. We do not accept sovereign nations making their own policies. And, with his cool helmet and his really nifty uniform. I'm really amazed that they still have this movie out there and you can watch it on YouTube. I mean, the lines that this character says and even the character's name, yeah, I mean, you really can't get any more on the face with it. But moving on from that, we have more images of this 2-month-long uprising by this upstart autonomous state that just created itself spontaneously in Paris and decided to impose their own government. Now, of course, because it's got commune on it, well, we know it must not have been a good government. And, if you find out that maybe you think it could have been, well, for those of us who think a certain way, recall that they said that the old world order needed to be swept away. RB, this is good. Humans are so weird. Yes, we are weird in what we'll accept and what we'll believe, RB. No arguing that point. But when you look at some of these images, you see some very interesting things. Now we're in Paris, and we have more photos of this Paris Commune uprising than we do of the Franco-Prussian War, which is very intriguing. Now, that might not be the overall case, but perhaps I should say that we have more photos that are more available of this little uprising than we do of the Franco-Prussian War. Why in the heck would that be the case? Well, keep in mind, this is 1871, 1872. And according to the official history, what's about to happen over the United States? You're about to have the Great Fire in Chicago. And let's not forget the Peshtigo Fire that occurred directly north of it at the same time, fortuitously, in Wisconsin. But you look at some of these images of this uprising, and it's very interesting. You have a fully uniformed military, which is explained in the official history because this was the National Army that was charged with defending Paris. They just decided to do an uprising and they're going to impose their own autonomous government because I guess things like that just happen in militaries where taking and following orders are emphasized. And believe me, it's the exact same thing no matter what particular form of government your military serves. You follow orders and you carry out orders. Now, apparently we have some where military juntas, yes, I mispronounced that intentionally, can rise up, or ruling forces by a 2-bit military dictatorship. But very interesting that you have this very wondrous series of structures here with all the detailed architecture that we have in it. And then you have some makeshift fortifications with some blocks out here. And then once again, so these guys seize the city. They know they're surrounded by enemy forces, which is the French army that's still loyal to the new French Republic. They're vastly outnumbered, but they've got time to not only build fortifications, but to pose for pictures. And then some flag that shows something, I'm not really sure what. Now, don't you find that just a little interesting? And again, this is something else that gets swept over in history. Now, if you're not from France, you're really not going to hear about this event too much. It's not really talked about. It's referred to by the fact that, yes, this is what led to the rise of what we consider the communist ideologies and the works of Karl Marx and so on and so forth. Karl Marx, not Papa Smurf, although they bear a striking resemblance. Hey, Robert, thank you for that. And welcome to the new members. But you look at some of these other images and you'll see similar things. Now, this was a statue of Napoleon, apparently the original Napoleon, that was toppled, which is rather odd because what's really intriguing about France is they seem to go back and forth in terms of how they regard Napoleon. Napoleon was our leader. He was our emperor. We highly regard him. But, then you read something else and it'll tell you, no, Napoleon was a traitor. He was trying to destroy the nation. So let's give him a cushy retirement on Elba. He didn't stay on Elba. All right, we'll give him a slightly less cushy retirement out in the middle of the South Atlantic. And that's that. And that's the end of the story. But you look at some of these images and again, remember, this uprising only lasted for 2 months. But they still had time to take these photos. And look at how they're equipped and how they're uniformed. There's more than just a few overlaps with what we see from the Union soldiers, especially of the United States Civil War. Now, again, is that a coincidence or what exactly is going on? Was everybody wearing the same type of uniforms and the same looking uniforms all across the nations of the land in the 1800s? What exactly is it really pointing to? And that's where things start to get very strange. Yeah, as Jamie says, too many plot holes, too many consistencies, too many plot holes, but yet somehow it all looks the same to us. Yeah, exactly, Leo. It's always a coincidence. I mean, why would that happen? There you go. I am Kairos, tailored. So was this a posed photo? In fact, was this a contrived event, dare I say? I don't know. But it is rather odd that this is stated to be from the exact same time frame, right after the United States Civil War, only we're in France. And yet we're talking about what's supposed to be one of the foundation events for the main conflicts that were fought in and through the 20th century or the 1900s, whatever we want to call it. Because this whole struggle between communism and capitalism, that was the main conflict of the 1900s. But then you look at some of these other images that are from this commune or this Paris Commune uprising. And again, you'll see the exact same sort of destruction that we'll see in the great fires that hit the cities across the United States at different times and all over the land for that fact. Now, the official history says that the French army had to come in and crush this Paris Commune, and they ended up killing many people. Accounts differ. Some say 16,000, others say 20,000. Who knows for sure? It might have been much more, especially when we consider the grueling and grim catacombs that still exist under Paris to this day. But you'll see no shortage of images like this. Structures that are just utterly demolished. Must have been turning loose those nuclear-powered cannons again that could do so many things and reduce buildings to rubble. But it is very peculiar that it's at the exact same time of the Chicago fire. Maybe it's a coincidence. But then you'll have other odd images like this where you'll see everybody celebrating. And remember, this is a fully uniformed and fully equipped National Army of France. And yet they all just decided to take the dive and support this random uprising, this uprising of a national army and citizens, coincidentally, that wanted to sweep off the order of the old world? Is that what was really happening? Or is that just what we're being told happened? Yeah, there you go, RB. It was a musical. Funny you say that too, especially when we talk about all the musicals that we have. Les Miserables, albeit set during an earlier time frame. But yeah, sure, why not? The Paris Commune, the musical. I could see it happening now. But you know they'd never do it. You know why? Because it's not a remake, which we are coming up on with this. So moving on from this whole concept of this Paris Commune, what you have is another conflict. And remember, conflict is not just war. We tend to associate war with conflict, but remember, conflict can be many different things. Any of the implements of national power. And yes, that includes disasters. That includes health emergencies. Anything can really induce a conflict among the people because it'll get people to fight. It'll get people to struggle against one another. What was really happening here in this commune in Paris? Was this really a random uprising as we're told that it was? Or was it something else entirely? Oh yeah, all troops had a band, no doubt about it. And that's what it really comes down to is when we're trying to decipher, and that's what we're oftentimes trying to do, decipher this historical account that we're given. We have reason to suspect that there are many half-truths that are given to us in this entire account of this Paris Commune uprising. But what's the final truth? What does it all really mean? Is it possible? Oh, here, Vaughn with a great reference, District 9. Yeah, very, very interesting movie. No sequel to it, even though it was an original movie. But yeah, I'm not really sure what was actually going on here. Is it more likely that these words that these Parisian women said, allegedly, were assigned to them after the fact? Is it possible that what was really going on here was that you actually had an enclave that was being wiped out here in Paris? Is that really what the Franco-Prussian War was about? And because there were too many people that were causing trouble and, how shall we say, not doing what they were supposed to do in Paris, which, let's be honest, that's what the official history says, an autonomous state. We do not accept autonomous sovereign nations, and we do not accept autonomous sovereign individuals. Launch the attack. And you can look and see the size of the army that actually had to go into Paris and clear all this out. And destruction tenfold that we see from many of the cities that match the United States Civil War. And here you have it. And you can see that a lot of these old world structures seem to have been targeted in a way. Now, these are still standing, and many of these structures are still standing in Paris to this day. And Paris is another one of those cities that you can, and if you have the means or you're there, visit, because there is a lot of old world architecture that does remain and somehow survive this. But you get the impression that there was something very different going on, that these images seem to have been posed after the fact, after this great battle was won. Although, what did it really involve? Was it really two uniformed armies fighting, or was it just one uniformed army that was, how shall we say, clearing, holding, and building? Yes, I'm very, very specifically choosing those words because guess what? That's the same process that's still done to this day in what's called counterinsurgency conflict. Ah, yes. Yeah, there you go, Jamie. Pummel the evidence to dust. And again, people that are not accepting their assimilation or their indoctrination, then you've got an alternative. You either capture them all alive and then have them taken off to internment locations, asylums, or you just simply kill them on the spot. It's a lot simpler that way. And then all you have to do is get rid of the bodies. Oh, by the way, you already have these nice catacombs that are already there. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting how it links together looking at this particular event. And believe me, I'm just showing only a few of these images of this epic struggle that occurred in Paris in 1871, according to official history. But there are hundreds, if not thousands of them. And it's interesting that it is more of a well-documented event than the war that preceded it. So what, there were just photographers that were hanging around there and decided to get a bunch of pictures? Hey, the Paris Commune, we need to make sure we very well document this. And you'll see that in the comments section. People love to say, well, this event is very well documented. That's why we can trust that it's historically true. But I always find it interesting what's well documented and what's not very well documented at all. We would expect the Franco-Prussian War to be more well documented. It was a war between two major nations. It led to the foundation of the orders of the 20th century, according to the official history. Not very well documented. But the Paris Commune, we've got more pictures than we know what to do with, showing destruction and devastation in an entire city that seems to have been destroyed, but was rebuilt rather quickly and rather well. Again, that same old story. So what to make of it? I'm not really sure. But I think you know exactly where I'm going with the ideas. And you'll get other odd images like this where you see this equipment that's all lined up here. Oh, these must be these wonderful cannons. Of course, you may recall that, again, according to the official history, the Germans had superior artillery, and that was a significant advantage for the Franco-Prussian War. Who had the superior artillery, though, for the actual assault on Paris? Well, it looks like the army had all the superior artillery. Which army? The French National Army or the French Army of the Republic? So many different names, interchangeable names, just like we have the Grand Army of the Republic in the United States. Wasn't actually a fighting formation. It was the veterans organization that the Union Civil War veterans banded into. And they had great influence on American policies. So what's really going on? It's hard to say. Yet, oddly enough, you have your images that show the destruction of statues and a lot of defacement. And so, again, that does call into question, what are they actually defacing? What are they removing from the structures? And what are they actually changing? Yeah, great point right here. It is a strange picture. There's a lot of strange pictures when you really pull this all apart. And I think that's what really... Hey, Tanya, thank you and welcome. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. I think that's the whole thing, though, that we see with this, because when you see certain structures and statues, especially that have been destroyed like this, maybe we are looking at a very accurate picture. And maybe there was a definitive reason for why those statues had to be destroyed, because why is it whenever we look at statues, whether they're in France, Germany, the United States, especially when we're talking about statues that are war monuments or stated to be war monuments now, they always seem to have so many different dimensions and so many different inputs into them, almost as though they're lacking a harmony. You might think back to that soldiers and sailors monument that we looked at in Des Moines many times. And so think about all these images that we're seeing and how this really tells us that this is where the reset plan starts. Now, if you have a reset and you know the cycle of when it's going to occur, you need to establish a foundation. And what's the foundation? Well, the foundation is really your base of operations, if you will. It's going to be your area that's preserved, and that's where you're going to preserve learning. That's where you're going to have control, to where you're going to be able to, how shall we say, spread out from a particular area and start your new civilization. And I'm suggesting, this is a theory, that the evidence of where the foundation was in Italy. So we're going south from Paris, France, and we're going to take a look at Italy to show the evidence of this foundation. And we have covered this in other explorations. Now, what inspired this idea for me? Why am I saying foundation now? You haven't used that terminology before. Well, it actually comes, I know this won't surprise you, from a science fiction book. Hold on, let me change that image. There we go. Full screen it. So, the Foundation series, written by science fiction author Isaac Asimov, it talks about a futuristic empire, the Galactic Empire, that's going to fall. And this individual on the left here, Harry Seldon, predicts that it's going to happen because he studies this interesting variation of history where you can look at history to predict the future. Yes, I'm summarizing a lot. I don't want to go into the nuances of the novel because if you really are curious about it, read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. No, I have not watched the Apple series, and I do not intend to watch the Apple series. If you watch it and like it, all the more power to you. I would suggest reading the books because that's what started first. But in any event, in order to stop this barbaric period, this chaos that's going to follow the collapse of this empire, this individual, Harry, sets up this organization called the Foundation that's going to preserve knowledge during this chaotic time, and it's going to shorten this chaotic period from 25,000 years to 1,000 years. Now, we're going to look at the rise of these new humans that may have come with this, although we do see one of the mutants here called the mule, and the mule represents a different type of human. We'll get to that, though, when we look at the new humans that accompanied the reset. Yes, I'm going there, this exploration. It's all good. But back to the concept of the Foundation. So where is this Foundation located? Well, I'm going to argue, and this is a theory, and I'm always open to changing my theories, the Foundation is the Italian peninsula. Now, it's not to say that there aren't other locations, because if you read the Foundation novels, you may recall there were multiple locations. There was contingency in case one of the foundations was destroyed. But why not Italy? In Italy, we have the most examples of impressive surviving architecture. Now, the official history tells us that these very impressive churches were constructed over a period of hundreds of years or longer. You know, with the exception of St. Peter's in Rome, that only took them just over 100 years. But it's all very, very interesting when you look at this. Oh boy, the chat's just completely gone. Well, hopefully you're all still there. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. It's catching up. Anyways, it's just another one of those odd things. I must be onto something here because I'm seeing a major glitch with the streaming. Anyways. The reason why I wanted to talk about Italy, though, is that we've explored Italy in a couple different formats. We've looked at a couple different cities, and yet we have some of the most impressive architecture that survives there. The other interesting thing with it, let me see if I can get this working again. There we go. Just had to reload. All right, we're good. Yep, you got it. The Matrix acting up again. That's exactly right. Anyways, the Foundation being in Italy is based on all these impressive structures, but it's also based on the fact that Italy is the location of Rome. Although, yeah, it's the subject. It's been that kind of week too, hasn't it? But the thing about it is we try to associate everything with Rome, even though this very impressive and futuristic cathedral that you're looking at here in Milan was not built by the Romans. It was built long after the Romans, as is many other examples of the impressive architecture that's in Italy. Ah, yes, the Cathedral of Florence. This was originally going to be building number 1 for the channel, but I couldn't access Florence, Italy very readily given my current situation. But you look at this structure. This was started there, the architecture and the building date on this precedes the Renaissance. So you can't associate this incredible futuristic structure with the Renaissance. And this just isn't Rome. This is all over Italy. So do you really associate these structures with the Romans? Or are the Romans really just a placeholder idea? Now, yes, a lot of people try to say the Roman Empire didn't fall. Well, maybe the idea of it didn't fall, or this concept of centralized order, but it's rather peculiar that maybe, just maybe, you have this foundation that actually is in Italy. You have these areas of learning that are preserved because they're supposed to survive during the reset. And this explains why we have so many incredible examples of architecture that exceed what we'd expect the capabilities of the official historical account of the time to tell us. Now, it gets even more strange When you think of the fact that the oldest continuously operating university in Bologna, and you may recall we explored it during the Bologna exploration in Bologna, Italy, is there, the oldest operating university. Now, if you follow on with this reset plan, then where would you actually start this? Well, in the universities, in the educational system. And RB says it's definitely a major energy point. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's some sort of extreme nexus. Now, why that is and what's the exact reason, we don't know for sure. But it is very intriguing that these structures and this impressive University of Bologna, which is officially the oldest operating university in the land. Now, yes, there are other educational institutions, and you can find other orders that do claim an older lineage, but yet this being the model for what we still operate with to this day with the modern university, and then all the other variations of the education system. So if you look at the very system that we were all guided into, this was the prototype for it. Or was this the prototype, or was this set up as part of this new plan of this civilization that we're going to impose after the last reset? Because suddenly you have evidence, not just the isolated monasteries, but then also these major universities, these major complexes, these compounds that somehow, some way, somebody knew was going to survive, or at least come out of the last reset relatively unscathed. And then fortuitously, they were not affected by the many conflicts that followed. Now, we are going to be doing an exploration of Italy, and we are going to be looking at a lot of these sites a lot closer, including some of these very impressive cathedrals, but not just that, but many of the other unique architecture. And we're going way beyond Rome. Yes, it will be a live stream because I would love to see your feedback on it, because there's no shortage of impressive structures that we have. Well, and then here you have it. Yeah, I mean, these locations, yeah, there's something energetic about them. And are they on ley lines? Yeah, geographical ley lines, but they're also on the ley lines that we don't see because it's a completely different map system. So it is a lot of overlapping that we have here in Italy. And that's the evidence that this foundation, in other words, this baseline for starting your new civilization, it was in Italy. It all makes sense because this is where Rome was. And so that's how we tie it into our historical account. And why we have so many people who know so much about Rome, even though it existed a couple thousand years ago. Or if you want to be generous and say the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire, yes, that was a lot sooner. That lasted to the 1400s, although it was very different. So who the heck knows for sure? But again, it's just another one of those interesting coincidences. But just going into some of the random structures anywhere in Italy, we've looked at several palaces, we've looked at many cathedrals already. You'll see that there's no shortage of impressive examples of artwork, as though Michelangelo lived in every town. There was a Michelangelo or a Da Vinci in every single building to design all this stuff. And not just to design it, but to build it. And then don't forget that they also tell us, according to the official historical report, that there were architects that were exported to other locations. How exactly did they build that impressive Kremlin in Moscow? Well, they got their architect from Italy. That's easy to explain, because some guy decided to leave Italy and go to Russia. Yeah, okay, that makes sense, doesn't it? So, but if you think about it, while it may be a half truth, it might be a full truth from another perspective. And that's how we actually account for all this. Hey, New West Reset, good to see you, and thanks for joining us. And so that's where we get this idea of the foundation. In other words, it's your geographical area where you're going to preserve the knowledge, or you're going to set up the knowledge for your baseline to start your new civilization. And that's how we explain all these impressive remnants that we have in Italy. And in fact, you can even say, yes, Rome was the heart of this great civilization that took all the Mediterranean. It might have been much more extensive, but who knows? But of course, we're going to tell people to think of it as Rome. And yet, why is it we have all these positive inclinations of Rome? That's what's really intriguing about it. Well, they were very civilized, but they had slavery, so they were evil. They were terrible. Nobody decided to pull a Spartacus, except, of course, for Spartacus himself. So we can explain this forced labor. That's how they achieved all these architectural impossibilities, despite not having one iota of industrialization. Exactly. So moving on from the foundation, let's take a look at the new type of humans, because if you're going to get away with doing a reset, you may as well change the entire human themselves, right? You may as well change the entire people that you're dealing with. Because something that we come across in these explorations, and some unfortunate and disturbing possibility, why do you have to deal with the same kind of people when you can change them and make them a little bit more, how shall we say, amendable? Hey, Hank, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And so going back to the numerous images that we have of orphan trains, incubator babies, is it possible that someone was actually engineering or creating new humans? And why would they do that? Now, I haven't really breached this topic much. We've alluded to it a couple times. We've explored the concept, but here I'm actually throwing down an entire theory that what we have here is these incubator babies that we have that are showcased rather bizarrely in Coney Island, although they were showcased in many other locations, Coney Island being the most well-known, and who knows wherever else was lost in the records. That what you have here are these humans that are the new generation that have been designed to be different than the older generation. Because if we look at different legends and different accounts, we'll find that the human type has changed. Now, I'm not going to show some of the more obvious examples, but if you look at the medieval art or the art purported to be from the Middle Ages, you'll see that there's no shortage of large humans and small humans. Now, of course, you could say, well, we have an adult female and perhaps a younger lady here who might only be 12 or 13. Yeah, it's possible. But you can find plenty of other images where this difference is a lot more pronounced. And the actual height difference is very pronounced. Now, is it just allegorical? Yes, I will concede it could be. But there's too many images and there's too many allusions to the fact that there were different types of humans in the past. So again, make of it what you will. And no, we're not talking about the rather very benign differences that we have, because actually we still see greater differences when we look in certain places. So is it possible that the actual human physical form was changed? Now you see some other images from the Middle Ages and you have some very bizarre things. You've got mythological and legendary accounts of human beings that were almost demi-humans. They were actually a mix, or who knows what was really going on, some sort of, dare we say, hybrid of a species that was being created. Or was it really a hybrid, or was it a unique species? Who knows for sure? But there's all kinds of hints and clues that indicate there was really something very strange going on in the distant past. Yes, Queen Peachy Keen says here, a missing link. There's always a missing link. And it really gets tedious after a while, that's for sure, because, yeah, there's a missing link here, there's a missing link there. Why is it we don't have anything? Jamie, Dante from Devil May Cry. Yeah, no doubt about it. And it comes up many different times and in many different formats, and that's what makes it so very interesting. But why would someone want to change the actual human from the past? Well, there's all kinds of, I'll just say this out loud, sinister plans that are written by people that were informed are somewhat crazy, but for some reason we still have their writings available. I'm not sure why. And they constantly talk about how the best way to rule people would be to create an entire group of people who are easier to rule. Now, if you ever look at the original film Blade Runner, that was written by a famous science fiction author. His name was Phil. We won't say anything more about his name. You'll find that there was an example where they produced humans that they called replicants. Now, they were actually robots, but when you watch the film Blade Runner, you'll see that the Tyrell Corporation's logo was more human than human. In fact, the CEO even says it himself, Eldon Tyrell, more human than human. That's what we shoot for. Now, if you think about that, now, yeah, it's a science fiction movie, but remember, science fiction has its roots in history and was inspired by something. Why in the heck would you want something that's more human than human? What's that really mean? Now, if you actually go through the films and look at what these replicants have, well, these replicants have enhanced capabilities. They have enhanced physical capabilities. They are stronger than human beings, and they're at least as intelligent as the genetic engineers, the geniuses that created them. That's what we understand. But what if someone was trying to create a group of humans that had a lower capability, a shorter lifespan, the reduced attention span, the ability or the adherence to being obedient, and the adherence to authority? Then all of a sudden, and here, great comment right here, a control issue. So suddenly you remove that control issue from this new group of humans. This is going to be your population now for your new civilization. They're not going to have enhanced physical and mental capabilities. They're going to be more obedient. They're going to be easier to control, easier to influence. And the Sky Sage says it right here, alter genetics. Because that's the whole point, to have these new type of humans. Suddenly you don't have this threat to your power base anymore. Or maybe they're not even ever a threat to your power base. They're just simply more manageable. It could just really be for that reason alone. Now, yes, you know how I like to throw rocks at the new Battlestar Galactica series now and then. What I always found fascinating about it was we had all this plot development about the Final Five Cylons, the androids that were practically human. Although it should be noted that that idea was actually featured in Galactica 1980, the Forgotten Revival series, but we won't talk about that. But I always found it interesting how they never really specified what the difference was between the Cylons and the humans. I don't know. Maybe Ronald D. Moore just didn't know, or he just didn't care to answer it. I mean, Starbuck disappeared and vanished in the wind, just like Luke Skywalker did in The Last Jedi. So somebody made it cool before he did it. But you go back and if you read Isaac Asimov's original novels, namely Foundation and Empire, and focus on the character of the mule being a genetic anomaly that actually threatens the plans of this Harry Seldon, because he couldn't predict this genetic anomaly. And what you realize is that the mule, while not necessarily a protagonist or a heroic character in the story, it actually is an antagonist. It represents the possibility of something that's not happening according to plan. In other words, the mule is not representative of this degraded capability of humans that we have. It represents an abnormality. In other words, it does become a threat to the very plan itself. Now, if something like that were to happen, if there was someone or something like that, then what does it really matter? Yes, you're all referencing that other great work, A Scanner Darkly, again, by that same author whose name is Phil, and the rest of the name shall be unmentioned, but you know who it is. So, oh yeah, and then, yeah, RB says it right there. In a manner of speaking, that is absolute truth right there. But is it a physical reality? Is it an ethereal reality? Is it a spiritual reality? I don't know for sure. Jamie, the angry donkey headed. Yeah, I mean, and that comes up a lot. And why is that image associated with that? Those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask because it comes up a lot. So what does it really come down to with the new type of human? I mean, it's also interesting that when you read the novel, there is a time when the mule, who's a mutant human, dresses himself up as a clown, kind of like Kefka Palazzo. Why do we have all these references of clowns suddenly being very threatening? Why is it that this foundation in this novel, and keep in mind this is old artwork you're looking at here, I mean, this is from even before the 1980s, if memory serves, that you have all these spires that look like they could be from the cathedral in Milan? Is that just a coincidence? Yeah, sure it is. He was inspired by something, I guess. Why is it always a clown? Why do we fear clowns? I don't know. What's it really alluding to? Again, I don't know. Yeah, KC933. Kevin Costner in Waterworld was a mutant. That's right. And remember, we don't like mutants. They're frightening. And oddly enough, that's a theme we see repeated in multiple works. Now, going on from this new type of human, let's talk about how population control can be effectively accomplished. Now, we're not talking about anything nefarious here or terrifying, like the destruction of whole groups of people or anything like that. We're just talking about how population control could be achieved and how it could very easily be achieved without even anything remotely threatening. And I haven't really talked about this much before. I have explored it a few times, but what I'm going to talk about is from a more positive perspective. In other words, controlling the population from a positive perception. Now, all of us, what we want to do, hold on, let me go to the better image. There we go. Take the full screen. What you'll see that comes up a lot is everybody wants to fit in. And is there a manual, if you will, that'll help you fit into this civilization? Well, I've talked about this before a few times, and now I'm going to talk about it here. The 48 Laws of Power, written by Robert Greene. And, Robert says it, yes, by dividing the people. But how do you divide the people? Well, it's simple. You get them to operate in what they think is their own interest. But You give them their own interest. And how do you do that? And I'm not casting author Robert Greene here as some kind of evil individual. Like I said, if he didn't write this novel, somebody else would have, or this book, or whatever we're going to call it. Anyway, the 48 Laws of Power in a nutshell is simply 48 laws that you abide by that'll give you power. It'll enable you to actually rise in the society. Although others correctly identify that the only place you're going to rise to is middle management, and you're really going to be in the position of being responsible for everything and achieving nothing. Because what's the first law of power? Law 1, and this is from the book, never outshine the master. How fitting that they use a chicken here with this. Yes, that's very, very fitting. And what does never outshine the master really mean? Well, I'll tell you. It means that you are never the master. You are not even the master of yourself. Someone else is your master, and you should never outshine that master. That's law 1 in this book, The 48 Laws of Power. So you will never be the master. You will never set your own dreams. You will never set your own interests. Somebody else is going to set them for you. You better know who that person is, and you better not outshine them. Elizabeth here. I'm not going to say it's stupid. And you know why? Because I think it's actually a great example of something to be aware of. But yeah, from the perspective of how many people interpret it, yeah, it's probably a good way to describe it. Hey, thank you, New West Reset. I appreciate that. And welcome to the new members. But population control by having these perceptions that are imposed on us. And believe me, Robert Greene's little book here is not the only book that imposes this on us. You can find this in many different self-help books. You can find this in the guide to be a good military officer, a good corporate officer, a good government officer. All these rules read the same. And let's look at some of the other ones. Make yourself indispensable, concentrate your forces. What are some of the good ones that we always see? Protect your reputation. Yes. Just almost as important as Law 1, because it conforms to the mentality that your self-valuation is dependent on what others think of you. Sky Sage says it very well here. How to obey. Absolutely. You better protect your reputation. So make sure you don't tick off your boss, and make sure you protect your reputation. Oh, here's another good one right here, right next to it. Always say less than necessary. Appeal to selfishness, not virtue. I love it. Surrender to recover. Let your victims feel smarter. Create your own identity. But that comes after 1, never outshine the master. So are you really creating your own identity? Or is this another example of double speak, double think? 2 + 2 = 5. I don't know. I'll leave it for you to discover what you should actually think of this book. I'm not going to say there's points of it that contradict each other. Let's be honest. What book doesn't contradict itself? It's just some are a little bit more obvious about it than others. Oh, here's a good one. Court attention at all costs. Yeah, maybe that should say court positive attention at all costs, because you certainly don't want to court attention for things not going right. Because remember, you can't outshine the master, but you also don't want the master to think that you're a fool who can't do anything right. Know your opponents. Crush your enemy totally. Be a masterful courtier. Oh, yes. Play politics, in other words. Despise the free lunch. So you can look at all these rules. Oh, here's another good one. Act like a king to become one. But remember, don't act like a king and outshine the master, because remember, there's a master. So only act like a king when you're talking about your peers. And when you really step back and you look at that, you suddenly see the nefarious mentality of the 48 Laws of Power. And like I said, it just summarizes everything that we have so well and so effectively. All these different how-to novels, the Army Officer's Guide from any nation, it all reads the same way. That you should all abide by these rules. Yeah, you don't have to, but if you want to succeed in this civilization, this is the way to do it. These are the 48 Laws of Power. Now, here's something else, a little saying from the film Fight Club, and this is actually a 1990s film, believe it or not, and an interesting one at that. And one thing of the reason I want to look at Fight Club is because here you have it. And Tyler Durden says it all right here. You are not special. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake. You are the same decaying organic matter as everything else. Yeah, it is a really good film, and there's a lot of, how should we say, I'm not even going to say truth bombs, but just obvious objectivity that's spoken in it. Because guess what? Who views us this way? Big corporations never go up their power and control. They just change their name. Yeah, and it's a pretty effective way to do it, isn't it, Sky Sage? And that's how it's always gone. You can even hear it in that song. Who cares? They're always changing corporation names. Yeah, I know. But anyway, all these laws apply to others. Isn't that interesting? But what I'm really getting at here is with population control is they're setting these expectations. There's nothing extraordinary about you. You shouldn't think of yourself as anything special. You're not. So it doesn't really matter. Yeah, there you go, Atom Bomb. Number 1 rule of Fight Club. Number 2 rule, just to make sure that everybody does it, right? Because we all know that when you tell someone not to talk about something, they're going to talk about it. Just like whenever somebody says something's secret, it's not going to be secret, right? Dallas, I never read Fight Club, but I did read Choke. Yeah, they're very interesting works. And if you read Fight Club, it comes across very differently than the film did. So, yeah, you're special if you think you're special, absolutely. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But it's really that simple because it's about controlling the population. So moving on from that, let's talk about intelligence quotient. Yes, that IQ test, because everybody is going to be categorized by who is exceptionally gifted and who is mentally inadequate. Oh, funny, they use that terminology, mentally inadequate. And of course, most people, according to this IQ test, fall in this range between 85 and 115, the vast majority of the population. Does anyone else feel like their IQ is not one specific number, but rather a range of numbers here? Well, I don't know. I mean, is this an actual test, or is this something that's just imposed upon us? Is this something that came as a result of this new civilization that we have? I don't know. Yes. I know, Michael. You're right. But anyways, think about how much this affects the way we view ourselves. You took an IQ test. We have a number that we associate with you, and that number shall be your identity for the rest of your life. Now, you can take another IQ test. Maybe you'll do better on it. But yeah, it's rather interesting. And one of the explorations I have scheduled here pretty soon is how do we actually identify these people that were gifted? Here, Heidi, who made up the test? Very good question. Who made up the original test? That will be one of the questions we try to answer because it is a good one. Now, you have everybody, they take their test, and let's just say I took the test and I scored an 87 on it. Okay, I guess I'm kind of average, but, I'm a little bit below average because it says that. I wish I were above average. And suddenly, because there's a test with a number associated with it, and that number's in my mind for the rest of my life, that's where I'm going to park myself. And in fact, that's where other people are going to park you. Now, granted, we don't have the number tattooed across our foreheads, although what difference does it make if that's what we're thinking of ourselves? Because if you think about it, the best way to control a population is to control how people think of themselves. And this is where it all starts. We have this intelligence test that applies to everybody. Everybody takes it, and this is how you're going to look at yourself for the rest of your life. That's the real intention behind it. It doesn't have anything to do with what other people perceive you as, because remember, that's what the 48 laws of power are for. Now, something else that we impose upon this, if somebody does foolishly think they're highly intelligent, and yes, I say that directly, foolishly thinks that, you're not going to be happy if you're highly intelligent. Highly intelligent people have more expectations, and they tend to reflect. And you're not supposed to reflect inward. You're not supposed to go on journeys of self-discovery. Oh, no. That's going to make you unhappy. And you might have noticed that in recent years especially, although this has always been with us to some extent, it's just gotten a lot more obvious. And you can certainly watch a YouTube video. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's a certain graphics channel where they talk about why people who are intelligent are miserable because they reflect inwardly. And that's why even if you are an intelligent person, you should loathe yourself, because ultimately your success or failure in life depends on what other people think of you. It doesn't matter how intelligent you may or may not be. It only matters what other people think of you. And so once again, you are controlling the population by controlling how people view themselves. It's very effective. It works very well. And we can even take this little quote from Charles Bukowski, and yeah, look up that guy. He's a very interesting individual. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. I don't do a very good Charles Bukowski, but just looking at him, it kind of sounds like he'd sound like. There's plenty of videos of this guy. Very interesting character, and yet seemed to be very dysfunctional. And oddly enough, that seemed to be what was presented to us very directly. But whatever the case with him, you can think about this. Intelligent people are full of doubt. And are stupid ones full of confidence, or is that just what we say? Or does it really matter what someone else thinks of you? You either have confidence or you don't. Or as Captain Kirk said, you either believe in yourself or you don't. It doesn't really matter where you are on that intelligence score. And it doesn't matter whether you read the 48 Laws of Power or not. That's truth. But we want you to think it does matter. Your intelligence score matters. Having self-doubt matters. And what other people think of you, it's the most important thing in the world. That is one of the basic rules of the civilization. And if you look at the 48 Laws of Power, absolutely, starting with your master, but then everybody else. Now, the good old Myers-Briggs personality test. As if we don't have enough fun ways to control the population through self-perception, we've got a personality test that you can take. And this personality test will yield one of 16 results. There's only 16 personality types in the entire land, according to this personality test. Oh, look at this. This changed. They show an ENTJ being a soldier or service member. I thought it was an INTJ or INTJ. Oh, whatever it changes. Depends, when you look at it. I'm sure they change it over time too. But yes, they're saying that of the billions of people, and who knows how many there really are in the population, there's only 16 personality types. I'm just going to be honest with you. I have never subscribed to that mentality. I've never believed that. I've come across many unique people that have shown many dimensions that are far past this. And no, not just in the United States, but all over the land. I believe there are unique individuals, and they are past simply having a designation of 4 letters. So what have we got for you so far in controlling your individual perception of yourself? We've got 48 Laws of Power to succeed in the civilization. We've got an intelligence test that you take and a number that you're associated with. And then we've also got 4 letters. That's your personality. And guess what? When we assign these things to you, whether they're true or not, you're going to conform to them. Oh, yeah, well, we're not even getting there for this exploration. We don't have to, but it is another good example. Because if you think about this, how many people fall into these categories of intelligence and a personality type? How many people do you already have ensnared, and you're controlling how they think of themselves by assigning them an intelligence test number and assigning them a personality type, a number and 4 letters? How many people will that take care of who will think and act a particular way for not just today, but the rest of their lives? Now, also going back to if we have human beings that have been, how shall we say, altered to be more obedient, to capitulate to authority more, then how much more powerful does this become? Suddenly this gets very disturbing. Now, where does that fit into fast food chains? Well, this is just simply the old carrot and stick mentality right here. Because if you look at the fortuitous rise of fast food, and oddly enough, it was a relatively decent movie, The Founder, where they depicted the foundation of McDonald's, which is the foundation of founding of fast food chains, with Michael Keaton, of all people, portraying Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc, interestingly enough, from Illinois. A lot of interesting people come from Illinois. Yeah. To include a guy by the name of John Carter. Now, that's not his final name, but yeah, John Carter was from near Chicago, and he adopted a different name, Charlton Heston. Yeah, a lot of interesting people from Chicago. But beyond that, the whole point of fast food, to offer you a simple, quick, and easy meal. That's the whole point behind fast food. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, what's so bad about that? I've heard you talk about chicken wings. I know you got some fast food proclivities, Lucius Aurelian. Yeah, we all do, especially, if we grew up in the United States, but really anywhere in the land, because guess what? It's worldwide. But the whole point behind it is to make things convenient. That's the whole point behind it. We're going to make things very convenient. And that's the whole point behind fast food. And, you can watch that movie, The Founder. You can read about the story of Ray Kroc, and you can think that, yes, there were a couple of guys, the McDonald's brothers, that came up with this revolutionary service system to rapidly provide customers food in a very short amount of time after ordering it. And suddenly it was franchised into this worldwide fast food empire. And then there were other ones that followed the model in a way. By the way, I think you recall during our 1980s explorations, I missed classic Pizza Hut when it was a sit-down dining facility. But that's okay. It just followed the McDonald's model, right? But think about that. Think about how associating numbers, letters, and now making life easier for people. Because we all have to eat, right? Now, are we willing to eat anything if it tastes good? Or if it gives us a little bit of a high in a moment, and even though there's a worse low, are we going to go back and get more of it? Because, I'm not certainly a teetotaler here against alcohol, but how many people are willing to accept hangovers and then, they'll go back and drink the very next weekend? It becomes a habit. So is that something else that we're more susceptible to? Are we more susceptible to habits and processes just because they're repeated, they're comfortable? Whether they make us feel good or not, that's beside the point. That's just my routine, and I'm going to do it. Now, granted, many of us do impose our own controls over our own routines, but how many of us fall into these routines because they're simple? It's easy to go to McDonald's. They had 2 drive-thrus at every single location. And by the way, they started delivering to your house fortuitously before 2020. What a great business decision. I'm sure it was fortuitous. Anyways. Also, let's talk about the media. Oh, yeah. Because everybody's got to be informed. Now, one of the things people used to say was, well, in the 1980s, the media was not all owned by 6 major companies. It was owned by about 300 companies. But go back and watch the newscast from the 1970s and the 1980s before this current reality came about and see how true it really is. Is the media really more independent back then? And you can find no shortage of examples. Or is it the same thing? So are they really just giving us a different explanation for why we have these numerous companies that tell us what's really going on in the world? Yeah, you could watch CNN and then you could watch Fox News and get entirely conflicting reports. But then are they really conflicting or are they still talking about the same major events? I'll leave that question for you. I'm not going to deep dive in the media in this exploration. Merely talking about thinking on the concept that we're informed very clearly that the media is owned by 6 major companies. And they like to tell us that in the past it was owned by multiple independent companies, I guess. And then last but not least, if you want to look at the true nature of how Thomas Hobbes looks at government, read Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes, who was a philosopher from the English Civil War time frame, he argued that the sovereign, that was his euphemistic term for absolute authority government, that's exactly what a government should have. A government should have the authority to do whatever it needs to do to maintain control of the population. And even if a government operates outside of the bounds of its authority, the population has no authority to remove that government. Now, that's what Thomas Hobbes is saying. I'm not saying that's what current governments are saying or anything like that. You can come to whatever conclusions you want to. But I strongly suggest reading Leviathan because you'll find some interesting, how shall we say, Orwellian references in it long before George Orwell ever thought of writing 1984. Although who knows, maybe they were written at the same time. I'm not really sure. But yeah, Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes. A little bit of a disturbing blueprint, if you will. And then finally, I'm just going to reference this because this is just completely random, and sometimes I like to be random. Yes, we have another remake, but it's a sequel. It's The Naked Gun. We're bringing back Frank Drebin, but it's his son, so it's going to be different. When I saw the trailer for this, I just couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. I thought it wasn't serious, but yeah, apparently Liam Neeson, thanks to Seth MacFarlane, is going to reprise this. Who in the heck was actually asking for this? Do you know anybody who was constantly talking about, boy, I wish they would do Naked Gun again? I mean, we all remember Leslie Nielsen and the 3 Very Simple movies. And remember, these movies were parodies. So now we're remaking parodies too? Oh, heck yeah. But it's not a remake. It's a sequel. Not that it matters. Yeah, I'm with you, New West Reset. No one asked for this. I just saw this trailer and I thought, man, this just completely conforms to everything that we've had. And yes, this is another way of controlling the population. I'm sure there's nothing nefarious behind it, Yeah, Jamie says it very well right here. But that's what it all comes down to. So, yes, you've got more of your remakes. And, before too long, Maybe they'll be remaking other beloved science fiction franchises, and for the characters and the actors that are still with us, maybe they'll be pressing them back into service to do self-humiliation rituals. I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's what's happening, and I'm sure Liam Neeson is going to do a good job. I mean, he did a great job when he brought back Colonel Hannibal Smith, didn't he? Yeah, who remembers that A-Team remake? I sure don't, and I don't want to. But that's what we got. So expectations, down, down, and down. Now, going back to the final component of this, what we see with this whole reset plan is the same mentality of conflict, assimilation, indoctrination. I know you're probably going to say, oh, really? And you always go back to this. Why do you go back to this? Because it's the same pattern. It doesn't really change. It doesn't have to change because it's very effective. Now, if you add into the fact that you have this population that's been conditioned, that's been, dare I say, created to have these adherences to authority, then suddenly it's very, very effective. Was this just a city fire? This is actually the Union Stockyard. This is Chicago from 1934. Yeah, the stockyards are very, very interesting. And this one went up in smoke too in 1934, during the Great Depression, no less. So I don't know what was going on there. But then, we also have the monuments to the Great Fire. I guess I'll say that this is a nicer monument, again, commemorating the powerful Greek deities in the United States from the 1800s, I guess, and those pantheon of Greek deities. I will say it's nicer than some of those monuments they have to the famine, but, just, again, personal impression. What the heck does it actually have to do with it? What's with the dragon or snake creature down here? I don't know. Is it possible, again, that this monument was altered or modified? Maybe, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Got to do that boots on the ground in Chicago here pretty soon. Oh, look, look, look. I think I see our famous cartouche up here. Yep, can't go without seeing that. That cartouche that's everywhere. But you see other places such as Boston, and whether this was an area fire, a wildfire, a city fire, or whatever, it's all the same thing. Whether it's a war or whether it's a disaster or a health scare, it's all the same thing. Conflict, assimilation, indoctrination. Oh, let me catch that. Missed that one right there. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I have looked into Scranton a couple times. That's a very interesting area, especially that little electric city there that they've got. Very, very, very interesting. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Ancient Photoshop. Yeah, who knows for sure what exactly is going on with the images. Oh, I like this win. The cartouche is a light bulb. May well be, or it could represent something else. And some of them clearly have emblems that were removed, and some may have always been smooth. So, Sky Sage, I want to be a rock star, an actor, know a ball player, and make millions. Yeah, exactly. And then that seems to be what constantly gets pushed on us every single day. Grant had nukes. That's about true. But, if you go back and you look at how they try to explain what was going on historically, the cyclonic storm that was going on. Yes, one of these bizarre cyclonic storms. Now, we're no stranger to the Santa Ana winds over in California. Let me make sure you can see this. But they try to explain both the Peshtigo fire that happened up here and the Chicago fire that happened on the exact same day as a result of this very interesting storm. Unseasonable 80-degree temperatures. Oh, yeah, there's been a couple Octobers where it's gotten really warm. Gee, that's kind of funny. I thought high temperatures were something very recent, not from the 1800s, but I'm not going to further question that. If they said it was warm, then it was warm then. But, where were all the newscasters to tell us about all the difficulties with the changing weather? But apparently that's what's to be blamed for these massive fires that occurred in Peshtigo and Chicago. It wasn't a cow kicking anything, but, if a cow kicked something or it was a comet or whatever, you had these fires. And then you had these winds that fan these flames, apparently. Yeah, yep. So again, it's the same kind of explanations. Or maybe it's a pigeon dropping a cigarette butt on a building like Tomlinson Hall. Can never get enough of that one. This is very interesting here, though, because I just randomly saw this apparent Chicago fire monument that's really, really odd. That looks like one of those spires that we saw in Milan. What the heck is going on here? Is this ball, the sphere, just floating above it? Doesn't look connected. I mean, I know it's just a drawing, but very, very odd, strange. And so you suddenly go back and you look at all this and you see what all of these actually mean. and what they could really be alluding to. You see the fact that this reset plan has a lot of different indications and a lot of different possibilities for how it could have been done from start to finish. Oh, there you go, Jamie. No, it was a smoking a church warden's pipe. Oh, yeah, at least you forget about that one too. So, but I think when we look at all these different examples, these conflicts, these cities, everything that happened purported to be from the 1800s, we have a lot of evidence that there was a very clear and defined reset plan. We still see this reset plan that's still happening on a much smaller level today. And it's the same process. It hasn't changed. That's a good one. Yeah, it looks like the Empire State Building. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good call out there. But it hasn't changed. It's the same process. Now, do we even have decisive conflicts anymore? I could argue that we don't. I mean, really, we haven't had decisive conflicts since, I don't know, sissy. I don't know. Let's take a look. I mean, again, it is just a drawing. But who's to know, who's to say? I just found it very interesting because the top part of it looked like some kind of spire or more advanced technology, but maybe I'm just seeing things. I don't know. What is that G associated with? Maybe it's associated with the really cool character Sultan Grease from the Mission Earth series, written by L. Ron Hubbard. Yes, I went there. Or was it really written by L. Ron Hubbard, or was it written by somebody else? I don't know. But you look at these processes that repeat. You see them over and over again in history. And you still see them presently. Whatever conflict we want to associate with, then that's the conflict that we're going to associate with. And we see the same process that continues to this day. Anyways, I hope that this live stream really laid out exactly how this process looks and gives you the idea that there really is a process. Now, I will always caveat by saying it could all just be an incredible coincidence, or we could just be on a much smaller timeline than we know. You know, what's the timeline on resets? Do they occur every 30,000 years? Do they occur every 30 years? Do they occur every 12 hours? Like the film, the film I won't mention, but the one I talked about earlier this week. So, anyways, please hit the like button before you go, and I appreciate everybody for joining us for this live stream exploration. We are going to follow up by exploring the foundation, looking at some places of Italy that we haven't really explored. You're going to find out that there's actually a lot more to the Leaning Tower of Pisa than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Do you believe there's a way to interrupt, prevent the reset? Yes, but it depends what kind of reset we're talking about. That's a very complicated answer because we do have different kinds of resets. So anyways, well, I appreciate everyone for being here. And like I said, before you depart, please be sure you hit the like button and support the channel. I also wanted to let you know that I've managed to get out all of the content that I wanted to recover for the channel. So from here on out, the rest of the explorations that you're seeing, pending any issues, are all going to be entirely new and original. So I hope you enjoy them. We got 2 on tap for this week, and next weekend we're going to be exploring that foundation in Italy. So thank you all for joining us, and you all have a great week. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off, and please hit that like button before you go. Thank you.